Hello Year 5, I am going to be continuing off with from where Mr. Wang left off to the next part of our final chapter of the Firework-Maker's daughter. And as you know, the competition has started. Lila and Lao Chand are to perform and showcase their skills now. So let's see what happens. Lila and Lao Chand looked at each other. There was nothing to say. But then they hugged each other very tightly and ran to their places. As soon as the audience was settled again, they began their display. The first thing that happened was that little lotus flowers made of white fire suddenly popped open on the water with no hint of where the fire had come from. The audience fell silent, and when the flowers began to float across the dark lake like little paper boats, they were completely hushed. Then a beautiful green light began to glow beneath the water and rose slowly upwards to become a fountain of green fire. But it didn't look like fire. It looked like water, and it splashed and danced like a bubbling spring. And while the fountain played over the lake, something quite different was happening under the trees. A carpet of living moss seemed to have spread itself across the grass, a million little points of light all close together, that they looked as soft as velvet. A sort of "ah" sound came from the audience. Then came the most difficult part. Lila had designed a sequence of fireworks based on what she had seen in the grotto of the fire fiend, but it all depended on the delayed action fuses working as they should, and of course they hadn't had the time to test them properly. If some of the fireworks went off a second too early or a second too late, the whole show would make no sense. So here she is, she's taking a risk and challenging herself. But there was no time to worry about that now. Quickly and expertly, she and Lao Chand touched fire to the end of the master fuses and held their breath. First came a series of slow, dull explosions like the beat of a muffled drum. Everything was dark. Then a red light shivered downwards, leaving a trail of red sparks hanging in the air, like a crack opening in the night. The solemn drum beats got louder and louder, and everyone sat very still, holding their breath, because of the irresistible feeling that something was going to happen. I really like the way the tension has been built by the author here. Then it did. Out of the red crack in the night of a great cascade of brilliant red, orange and yellow lava seemed to pour down and spread out like the carpet of fire in the grotto. Lila couldn't resist glancing up very swiftly at Dr. Puffinflash, Signor Squarcini and Colonel Sparkington, and saw them all watching wide-eyed like little children. So there's lots of similes that have been used in this chapter because the author is getting you to visualize what's happening, particularly the firework display. So it'll be really interesting if you listen back to this video and read part of these, a part of the chapter when it's scanned, and draw perhaps an image of what this firework display must have looked like. When the lava carpet had flowed down almost to the edge of the lake, the speed of the drumbeat got faster, and sharp bangs and cracks beat the air between them. And suddenly, dancing as he had in the grotto, Razvani himself seemed to be there, whirling and stamping and laughing for joy in the play of the internal fire. Both Lila and Lao Chand forgot everything else and seized each other's hands and danced as well. Never had they produced such a display. So it's interesting how they've also seized each other's hands. Thinking about reading around a sentence, what do you think the word seized might be? And the fact that they have done that, the fact that they have seized each other's hands and danced as well, how are they feeling in that moment? And what do you think their emotions are towards each other and what they've achieved with that display? No matter what happened, it was worth it. Everything was worth it for the moment of joy like this. They laughed and danced for happiness. But the fire was not Razvani's, of course, and it couldn't last forever. The great red firework demon burnt himself out, and the last of the red lava poured slowly into the lake. And then the little white lotus boats, now scratched over the water like the stars in the sky, flared up and burnt more brightly than ever for a moment before all going out at once. Then there was silence. It was a silence that got longer and longer until Lila could hardly bear it, and she gripped Lao Chand's hand so tightly it nearly cracked. And when she thought it was all over, Lao Chand was doomed. Everything was ruined. There came a mighty yell from Colonel Sparkington. So at this point, we know that Lila thinks actually they haven't performed very well, because which word gives you that clue? I'll read that sentence again. And when she thought it was all over, Lalchan was doomed, everything was ruined, there came a mighty yell from Colonel Sparkington. So yeah, we've got words like doomed, ruined, and the phrase, it was all over. So she actually thought that it hadn't gone very well. Yee-haw, he cried, waving his hat, and bravissimo, shouted Signor Scorchini, clapping his hands above his head, and hock, 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 roared Dr. Puffing Flash, seizing the cymbals from his, I'm going to attempt to read this, bombardino Gilmitz Parkins pomp, in order to clap more loudly. The audience, not to be out-applauded by the visiting firemakers, joined in with such a roar and a stamping and a clamping and a thumping of one another on the back, and a whistling and a shouting that 438 doves roosting in a tree 10 miles away woke up and said, "Did you hear that?" So how has the audience reacted to the display? And who do you predict will win the competition? So have a little think, and I'll be back with the next installment of the final chapter.